Um, Culture Hour was started years ago, about almost 25 years ago, at Park University as a way to give international students there an opportunity to talk about culture. They often came to OI to the student services there at that time to me to ask about like immigration, about their I-20. But I knew that there was probably other questions related to their interactions with people in Kansas City and Americans in general. And so that was the birth of Culture Hour. And since then, we've realized it's a really good platform for also outbound students and just individuals who, like myself, love to talk about culture. I find it really interesting. I learn something every time. In fact, last week I was able to coordinate conversations with the KUMC Police Department. We had 3 sessions, 3 2-hour sessions, and it was amazing, like how much I learned from them. Many of them come from all over and have been all over the world with the military, actually, interestingly enough. So they had a lot of experiences with lots of different cultures. So fascinating just to get together. As a caveat, I always say I am not an expert in other cultures. I really feel like culture is about understanding myself so that then I can begin to understand that you also have a culture and it may not be the same as mine, because culture is really the rules and the expectations by which we live our lives. And so those rules and expectations are guiding me every day. And before I lived out of the country, I thought subconsciously that everybody had the same rules. Everybody had the same expectations, right? And that's not true. So the more I understand all of my hundreds of thousands and millions of rules and expectations that I live by, I can begin to understand that they might not be the same as yours. And that's what makes life really interesting. So we're going to go on. Like I said, this is a little bit of a PowerPoint, but we're going to move through the PowerPoint to a section. Just real quickly, Alexa, if you could, I'm going to ask you to stop somewhere. So if you could go through real quickly, that's about me. Go to the next one. Keep going. We're going to go to the iceberg of culture. The next one, keep going. 2 more. Yeah, another one there. So how many of you have heard about the iceberg metaphor of culture? Is that something you're familiar with, a term? Yes, Brian is yes. So Edward Hall was a famous anthropologist who wrote books on culture. And he had this idea that much of what we see about culture and what people think of culture is just the tip of the iceberg. It's like what we can see is the conscious part of maybe the way people dress or talk or sing or dance. But really, what's really interesting is the stuff that we can't see. And it's everything that goes on with the subconscious. And so this has to do with all these rules relative to, modesty and relationships and beauty and animals and decision making. It's just everything we do in our life. Okay, next slide. So he said that we must take time to live among people to understand a person's culture, but really we have to live among other people to understand our own culture, to understand that there even is culture. Because when you're living in a homogenous culture, it's very hard to know your rules because everybody's doing them. And it's really by the contrasted differences that we're able to see that. Continue. Next slide. Okay, continue. We're going to go to slide 11, I think it is. Okay, so no, go back. I'm sorry, go back to the last one. Okay, so here's a scenario I want us to talk about and read and talk about. So would someone be willing to unmute themselves and read this scenario? Alexandra, would you read it out loud? Are you comfortable?
Well, I can try.
Okay, thank you.
So, What in the World? A Case Study of Culture. A girl who has just arrived in Kansas City from Kenya is surprised at how friendly everyone is. Everyone smiles at her. At first, this seems very odd to her. She is a little uncomfortable because she doesn't know what to do. Why is everyone smiling? She asks herself. What does it mean? She begins to assume that everyone really likes her. She cannot believe how many people want to be her friend. Eventually, She is disappointed 3 weeks into being at her new university because everyone smiles at her and says hi, but no one invites her for dinner nor engages her in a meaningful conversation.
Okay. What do you think about this situation? What's going on here? Does it sound familiar? What does it tell you about people from Kansas City?
I would say that this like abstract tells me both about people from Kenya and Kansas City. So I can assume that in Kenya people are not used to be like friendly to everyone, say hi to like random people on the streets. But here in Kansas City and maybe like in other states of the US, you can walk in the park and some people who you just saw the first time in your life saying hi to you, how are you doing, and you have no idea what to answer. This was my
Right.
experience. I was like, why? Why you
Why
ask
are
and
you
then go
talking to me?
away? Yeah. And why did you ask how am I and then you just go away like I didn't answer? So yeah, so we can see that different people have different ways of just living. I don't know. For me, in Ukraine, we also don't say hi to each other every time. We don't smile usually to people we don't know. So it was like strange for me at first. I still
Mhm.
usually don't know whether people really want to know how I am or no. So it can be very confusing.
That's a really good point. And this is, I would say, definitely a Midwest habit. Maybe I can't generalize to the whole United States because I think when you go to big cities like New York and Chicago, they're a little more maybe like Kenya and like, Ukraine, where people are not smiling as much as strangers. Of course, there's always differences wherever you go. So we're going to generalize, right? This is generally Americans in the Midwest, especially Kansas City, smile a lot and say hi. And I think it's really interesting, Alexandra, that you mentioned that, hi, how are you? So that's a greeting, right? Greetings are a whole nother like thing to think about. Because when Americans say, hi, how are you? Uh, what is the expected response, Brian or Igor? What's the expected response for Alexa? What is that?
When someone says hi, and this one is stranger,
Yeah,
right?
right.
I don't know. It means just simply like a gesture, some kind. Maybe sometimes some may treat as a good manners. I don't know, but can we say that those are good manners?
Yeah.
Just well, like anyway, it's superficial. I mean, without any hint at become intimate, more intimate, or just to meet another person. However, as always, people vary, and
Right.
I think that anyway, in the United States, people they pay special attention to social lives, and they think about social norms, and they think about that, for example. If we talk about, you may say, for example, if this is a girl or a woman who says hi to me, doesn't mean that she wanna meet with me, so that I do not think that she wanna. At the same time, I have to remember that actually it is more appropriate and it is more culturally propagated socially here in the United States. However, in Ukraine too, but not very popular. Uh, that actually people, if we talk about more intimate relationship, between members of the opposite sex, so they should think about similarities and so on, and they think about some approaches, proximity, and so on. So
Right.
it will be much less likely for me to think that they say hi to me so that they want to meet me. You talk about so I mean, but people indeed they vary, and anyway, we should just treat it as a cultural the way of, I don't know, to. So for me, I just simply treat it as just how we call it? It's just greeting. I don't
It's just
know.
a greeting. Yeah, exactly. But what's interesting is what you're alluding to, Igor, is, and we have another slide here on greetings that we'll go to in a minute. Not yet, Alexa, but greetings are different from culture to culture. And there's so much meaning. And so, again, when we talk about rules, the people within that culture know what's expected. They know how you're supposed to respond. So we say, hi, how are you to a stranger? And as Brian put in, it's a platitude, it's a polite, not deep. So you're just supposed to say, hi, I'm fine, how are you? You might not even have time to repeat, to give the question back to the person because you're moving so fast and crossing. But it's just like, yeah, it's just the way we politely greet each other. Hi, how are you? Hi, how are you? I'm fine. How are you? I'm fine. It's not a real invitation to talk or to give a lot of information about ourselves. And this can be, the codes can be very confusing if you're not from this culture, because that question directly translated in another culture could mean that they really want to know how you are. And for example, I was living on the island of Hanape, and if they asked me, Yairom, if they asked me, how am I, or if I asked that person, Yairom, they would give me like everything that was wrong with them. My back hurts, I didn't sleep well, because it's a real question in their culture. And if you ask it, they're going to give a real answer because that's the expectation. Sometimes in America, a complete stranger will give you a lot of information when you say, how are you? And that feels a little odd to us. Like we're like, ooh, I don't know. That's like too much information. What am I supposed to do with it? On the other hand, when you know the person well, like it's Alexa and me, if I say to Alexa, hi, Alexa, how are you? She can tell me really how she is. She can say, I have a headache today, or I didn't sleep well last night, because we are friends and we see each other and know each other well, right? So do you see those differences like between relationships? So it depends on the context, right? So context matters. So if it's a complete stranger, hi, how are you? I'm fine. Even if it's a good friend, it might just be, oh, I'm fine, because it's just a greeting before you get into a conversation. But the context matters. The person matters. Who asked you matter, right? Have you seen that?
Right.
With your... Go ahead, Igor. What were you saying?
What should I say or answer right now?
Have you seen differences in people's answers depending on who they are? Like if they're someone who knows you well, they might answer more, and if they're a complete stranger,
Right.
they just...
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly like this. So usually I cannot hear from stranger anything personal, very personal. However, there can be some differences for sure. Or for example, I went to barber shop so that to have a haircut, and we talked to a barber a lot, and indeed this talk involved much more personal information. So some people, and I may notice that some people they are more open, others less open. Some may try to think about whether a particular information is very or not personal. Others do not care as much about this. So it's like maybe in a relationship, or it may be connected to a desire for intimacy, so for more intimate talk. So
Yes.
some people are better at communicating very superficial level, small talk. Others may talk the way so that more personal information is involved. So we have to actually to understand the people very in terms of their desire for intimate talk, let's say so.
That's a very good point. And I wonder culturally, because I see this happens a lot, and it's a little bit of what's happening with, and I've seen this with international students and individuals who come to the US. Sometimes it is confusing because there are situations where strangers will reveal a lot of personal information. And in fact, one of the stories from a student was related to that. They had lunch in the lunchroom, and a student sat next to them and told them a lot of personal information about their family, issues, troubles. And the student then felt like they were friends. Like, oh my gosh, this person likes me. We're good friends. Great. I'm going to have a friendship and maybe they'll, include me. But then the next time they saw the person, there was no like recognition or acknowledgement that they had had this deep personal conversation. And she was really confused because she said, I don't tell really deep personal information to strangers. I only tell it to really close friends. And so this is another thing that can happen in America. Like you said, your barber can tell you personal things. But it doesn't necessarily mean the barber's going to invite you to his house or invite you to a party, right? So I'm wondering, have you, how does that feel to you coming from another culture? Is that typical? Does that feel normal, or is it a little uncomfortable for you?
If you talk about, for example, in Ukraine, how do people
Yeah.
feel?
Yeah.
Less comfortable, I would say. Only if there is a higher degree of familiarity between people, and they may accept. Yet, more people they are afraid. So, social relationships are not well regulated. Maybe sometimes not as regulated as here. So, I mean, fewer psychologists, fewer people who actually try to regulate those relationships. But I would notice that actually in the United States there are also people who prefer um, less personal talk anyway. However,
Yeah.
who like to have more personal talk, they may be perceived okay. So here, as I understand. So I mean, there are two sides, roughly speaking.
Yes.
So if you speak very superficially, you will feel like you wanna talk more personal way, feel like you need more talk. I mean, more intimate talk. If you talk too intimately, so too intimate. If the talk is too intimate, then there may be some feelings like fear appear, so that actually you disclose yourself too much. I don't know, whatever way.
That's true. That's a really good point. And it can vary depending on the person in the situation, right?
Right. Situation too matters.
Alexa, can you go back a couple of slides to the culture bump? Right. Next one. Yeah. So we define these situations where things don't feel quite right. Maybe they've talked too much, maybe they talked too little, maybe they smile and it feels uncomfortable. It's a culture bump. Sometimes people talk about culture shock when an international individual comes into a new situation, a culture, and they're living there. But I prefer, because culture shock sounds like something that happens and then it goes away. And I like this idea of culture bumps. Can you go to the next slide, Alexa? So culture bump is really where people from different cultures are interacting and their expectations or rules are bumping each other all the time or sometimes. And it can happen continuously. It can happen randomly. It can happen, not so often, but in America, because we have so many different cultures, each of our cultures are our familial cultures. We don't have like one general culture. We have a lot of these culture bumps between ourselves, and not just like between people that we think are different than us or we think look different than us. And so it's really just about our expectations and our rules hitting each other. And when that happens, in a greeting or in a smile, it just can make us feel awkward or it can make us uncomfortable, can cause some emotions. Next slide. So with culture bumps, we have to remember that a couple of things, nonverbal communication is not the same from culture to culture. So sometimes maybe we're confused because it's about the nonverbal communication. It's helpful if we can try not to be angry. Sometimes we are, but it's helpful if we can like try to think about the situation and think about the emotion and try to understand about the rules that are occurring, that they're different. Try to just like not be judgmental, but just like observe or ask for clarification and just be like, oh, this is different. They smile a lot, but doesn't mean, what does it mean? And try to figure that out rather than making a judgment about the person or the situation. For example, this is very simple, but when I was working at Park University, a complaint came to me from like university administrators that some of my international students would go through a door and not hold the door for the person coming through behind them. And they just thought this was really rude of the international individuals. Why weren't they holding the doors? They should know that it's rude. Well, from their rule and being in America and Kansas City, we're supposed to hold the door for the person coming through, the next person. We hold the door for that person. And if we don't, then somebody who has the same rule can feel like it's rude. But in reality, I don't think people are trying to be rude. I think sometimes they just don't know, they don't see. And in the case of a lot of my international students, because they're from bigger cities and they just go very quickly and they're not trained and it's not a rule to hold the door for the next person. And, like my son, sometimes when we're in a busy place, he can get stuck holding the door for like 10 minutes. I'm not kidding, because he's holding it and everybody's going through and nobody takes the door from him, but he knows he's supposed to hold the door. And finally, I'm just like, we got to go. Give the door to someone else. Somebody else has to take over because we got to keep moving because there's a lot of people. So it's really just an interesting kind of thing that happens. And again, everybody can have different rules about that. But it doesn't mean the person means to be rude. So intention, what is the intention? Because most people don't intend to be rude. Most people want to be polite. We just don't always know the rules for being polite. So we talk about that. We call that a culture bump. Alexa, can we go to the next scenario? I think it's the one on greetings, actually, which would be really good. Yes, this one. So the next scenario is specifically about greetings. So Alexa, could you read that one?
An American volunteer on the tiny island of Ponape in the Federated States of Micronesia is often confused and offended. Every time she walks past a person's house, even a complete stranger, the person says, "Come and eat." She isn't sure how to respond. And every time she sees anyone, the person asks, "Where are you going?" Sometimes she is walking to the bathroom. She always tells people where she is going, but she feels her destination or what she is doing is no one's business. Although she thinks Pohnpeians are very nice people, she feels that they are a bit nosy.
I should say, when I say American volunteer, I should say a Midwestern American, because again, greetings are different from, location to location.
That is true.
Do you, so as an American, Midwestern, or someone asked me where I'm going, I don't like that question.
Mm-hmm.
In my mind, I think only my mother can ask me that question. Like nobody else can ask me that question. I mean, my children will ask it to me even today. Like, where are you going? And I'm like, it's none of your business. Because there's like a hierarchy for this question, right? Um, so so this was really disconcerting to me as an American on this island. People were always saying, come and eat. And I didn't know. I wasn't used to strangers asking me to come eat with them. So I was really uncomfortable. What do I say? What do I do? Do I go? Do I go eat? Do I sit down and eat with them? And when they asked where I was going, I was like, do I tell them? Like, what do I say? I don't think it's their business, but I would answer. So this was their greeting. So what do you think about these questions? And in your culture, like, is this normal to ask these questions?
Indeed, actually not. For example, the same way, it's similar in Ukraine. Similar. My mother also, I could not ask her where she is going. She would say it's not your business, and she did say when I tried. So I would say this is like an old stereotypic way of behavior. Indeed, if we think more carefully, thoroughly about if this question is correct or valid to ask someone, so I cannot answer that is this something inappropriate indeed, if we think about this carefully. So it's like a stereotype, and well,
Yeah.
when we see that many people around they adopt that same way, so then we think that that it may be inappropriate question to ask. But if we see that many people around adopt the way to behave more openly, at least it may be perceived as more open behavior or talk, so then we may treat it as something common and nothing wrong about that.
Correct.
So yes,
right. In Pohnpei, it was totally acceptable, right? That's what they asked.
right.
Yeah.
So anyway, at the same time, people have so all of us have some kind of fear that we may be afraid of. For example, if that person allows themselves to speak this way, maybe they are gonna ask even more personal question next time. For example, it's like expectation or anticipation of some, and we may think about something negative towards
Right.
us. So next more personal. That's why people do not like to talk this way too much. So is this situation a real one or not?
It's a
I'm
real
just saying.
situation, yeah. So all of these situations are real over experience either myself or my students have shared with me. So in this case, this was me. I lived on the island of Pohnpei for 3 years. I actually ended up marrying a Pohnpeian, and we had 5 children together. But since then, we've divorced. I'm remarried, and total, we have 9 children. So for me, I was really young when I went to Pohnpei. I had just graduated from university, and I'd pretty much always just been in the Midwest. I was in Kansas City and Denver, which is very similar to Kansas City. And again, very insular family, very homogenous kind of way, right, of seeing the world. And so when I went to Pohnpei, it was very different. The culture was very high context, and we're low context. And wonderful people, but very, very difficult experience for me because I had no experience with other cultures, really, no real experience. And so there were so many small and big things that were done differently. And so there was all this stuff always going on in my brain, like, why are they doing this? Why are they doing this? Why, what do I do? What do I do? And so very, very hard experience for me. But I learned a lot, and I continue to learn from that because sometimes it takes a while to understand. Like the brain has to process, and it begins to understand over time some of our experiences. But what's interesting for me about this is when you look at if you look at this from a cultural perspective and look at their culture in terms of their values, like you can see something about their values in the questions they ask everybody, even people they don't know. So they're asking, have you eaten? Are you hungry? Come and eat. Those were like, those all were kind of the same question. They'd ask, have you eaten yet? Are you hungry? Come and eat with us. So food, right? Hospitality and food was like central. It was like central to their being. It's an island culture, and so they really had this sense of each other, and that it was important that everybody ate, right? I did later find out that when someone said come to eat, it took some time, but they didn't really mean, it was a greeting. So I
don't really want to know how you are.
Exactly. So it's like we want to say, how are you? And you say, I'm fine. There, they say, come and eat, and you don't come and eat. Or they say, where are you going? And you don't really tell them where you're going. You say, over there. For them, it was a tight culture. So it was normal to ask where you were going, even though they didn't really want to know where you were going. Like they wanted something really vague. So it was their greeting, and this is a very special part of culture. Greetings, you have to understand what they're really requiring the answer to be. So when they asked me where I was going, I would say I'm going to the bathroom. And for them, that was the weirdest response. Like, why is she telling us I'm going, why would she tell me I'm going to the bathroom? That's like too much information and really awkward for them. But I didn't know. It took me like a year, literally a year, to figure out that these questions weren't real questions.
Oh no.
I was like so confused. It's like all these people want to know where I'm going. They want to know what I've eaten. Like everyone's my mom. It's how I felt. But it was very, very interesting. But every culture has their, what they value, and then it comes through and like their greetings, right?
Right.
So
But anyway,
really,
Yeah.
can you go on, Alexandra?
okay, I just want to ask one question. What should we answer to the phrase come and eat? Like thank you or what?
To which one?
Come and eat or come to eat or something like that.
It's a good question. What do you say?
So I was supposed to say, no, in this case, in Panapea, oh, thank you, but I'm not hungry.
Oh, I see. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
But right, but in fact, actually, for a newcomer, he or she could think of in the first place that these people, they don't know what good manners are, for example. So I mean, some negative attitude. And question to you then, did you get used to this way of greetings, or just simply some kind of small talk for them? So have you get created indeed, or it was still difficult in the end of the third year, or no, in the course of 3 years?
Mm-hmm.
Did you?
Yeah. So it's still very hard for me because on the one hand, Panapans, like again, their culture is very cohesive, and they know when they should say yes and like join someone to eat, and when they know it's just like a question that you're supposed to say no, it's okay, I'm full. I could never pick up on the social cues where it was a sincere, because food was also a big part. Like they really would like share food with a stranger. Like I learned to be very generous there. Like I will literally, and I mean it, offer my food to a stranger. Like so someone will say, "Oh, that looks good," and I'll go, "Here, you want to buy it?" Like to me,
She
it's
will.
like, yeah, I will.
I've seen it.
So there, it was really complicated because it wasn't like it was layered and nuanced. So that's what was hard. Because sometimes I should say, "No, I'm full, thank you," and other times I should say, "Oh yes, I'll come and sit and eat with you." And I could never figure that out. And I wouldn't be able to because it's so subtle. and you have to have been born there to know the rules. Relative to the where are you going, that's the real like greeting, where are you going? I understood it, but it still bothered me. I would still be like, don't ask me that. The internal mind was like, why are you asking me that? I still had a little emotional reaction to it because of my training. Yeah, because of the way I was brought up. Yeah.
Yeah.
But are there any situations like this in America for you? Like you were talking about people asking how you are. Does it ever bother you that no one stops and listens? Or are you at a point where you're like, that's just Americans, like, Kansas Cityans?
What kind of questions? Sorry, just how are you or where are you
Yeah.
going?
How are you?
I just was I was warned that here people they say this, so they say such words, so it's like greeting, and actually they do not mean anything, and you don't even have to respond. So sometimes it depends if I feel like I cannot answer, or I don't know, answer, I mean, I'm fine or something like that. So I just do not talk, and I just go there. But yeah, I'm all right with that. I just got used to such a way of greeting long ago.
Yeah.
So beginning.
And I don't know if it's because of my experience living in other countries, but I had a period as when I was in Kansas City where it really bothered me, the superficial, how are you? And so I stopped asking people that. I like took it out of my vocabulary because it bothered me that people would ask me and not like really care. I kind of felt like, if you don't care, why are you asking? Yeah, and it was really interesting that I went through that weird kind of transition. I think it was a little bit of just I don't know, I can't even explain it because I'm from here, so I don't, but I had this resistance to it myself.
Yeah, no, I feel the same way. There are times where it just drives me crazy because I'm like, why are we going through this situation of the pretending like we actually care question when we don't? Now, like if I'm on the phone with a customer service person, I will make sure I ask that question because I want them to understand that I recognize that they are a person and they're doing a job and they probably deal with a lot of cranky people.
Right.
But I mean, it's something that like I personally struggle with doing, but it's like everyone expects you to do.
And I wonder what it does say about all culture. Like, it's easy for me to look at the Pohnpeian culture and say, oh, I know they value food and they are a tight-knit community, so this is how their values are showed in their greeting. What does it say about our values? And that's we smile. I think our value is that we want to be seen as friendly and that we care about other people. That's my thinking about Midwest. Like, we want people to think we're warm and friendly. That's my guess. What do you all think? Is that like, what do Midwesterners want everybody to think about them? We're helpful, we're friendly, right? That's what we want the stereotype to be, I think.
Yeah.
Brian, where are you from? Did you put it in the chat? I didn't.
Yes, he said he was originally from Indianapolis.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Oh, but it was a military and then came to Kansas. Oh, went to KU. So we've been in this area for a while. Did you, Brian, and sorry, because I know you have to type this, but is there differences from Indianapolis, which is more like East Coast, I think, Northern, or do you feel like can you remember any differences between yeah. Big differences, yeah. Well, and that's another thing when we talk about culture that's so interesting to me because we generalize, but as Igor said, and it's important to always reiterate, there are always exceptions. And we have similarities in the Midwest, but the cultures are really familial. So Alexa and I, you could look at us and think we have the same culture, but her family is different than my family. And so our rules are different. There are some similarities, but not a lot. We have Irish. We're both like I'm Irish Catholic, so we have Irish that's similar, and we'll see some similarities between that. Having been raised with that Irish kind of lineage, there are some similarities. But you know, there's so much variance, and yet when we talk about culture, we have to generalize. So it's this really interesting thing between okay, here's the generality, but there's all these exceptions. Yes, that's what I thought, that Indianapolis, because it's big city. So like New York, Tel Aviv, yeah. And Kansas City is still, for even though it's like not a tiny city, it still has that really small town feel, right? Yeah. In fact, it is crazy. Like I can be out in public and figure nobody knows me. But 9 times out of 10, no matter where I'm at, people either know me or my family. They know there's some connection. You're going to find some connection. It's like a real small town kind of atmosphere.
Yeah. It's true.
Yeah. I don't know, Igor and Alexandra, because you're from Ukraine, you're not from Kansas City. Do you feel that it's kind of a small town feel, or does it feel like a big city to you?
For
Kansas,
me, it feels more like a small town. Yeah.
Yeah.
for me, it is also, I have similar feelings that it not small town, but I don't know, medium size. So like, I was born in Kiev. Kiev like 3 or 5 times bigger than Kansas City, and like it looks like half. I don't know. It's okay, just medium towns, just medium. Something between megapolis and village. I mean, it's just simply perception. Since there are a lot of I don't know areas with with houses, and it looks like more. So even area in downtown is so small, and a very few buildings. I mean, many story buildings, I would say. So with many story.
Yeah, there aren't so many skyscrapers and really tall buildings. Yeah.
I would say for me, it's also about the fact that there are a lot of like private houses, right? So for me, for me being Ukrainian, it looks like a town or village or something because we have like apartments, a lot of apartments. And also it's about how many people there are on the streets. So for me, being from Ukraine, Kansas City is empty, no people at all. Because in Ukraine, if you live in a city, it's always filled with people on the streets all the time. So that's what makes this vibe, this feeling.
That's a really good point. Yeah. People live in their homes, and that the fact that there's a lot more homes, single family home dwellings, as opposed to skyscraper apartments, that makes the difference. And then also just we're kind of spread out and people stay in their homes. They stay more secluded. They're not like walking the streets. Yeah. I think that's a really good way of the difference. Because when I go to big cities, that's the difference. People are out on the street and you can feel it,
Yeah. Because they've got better public transportation, so they don't have to drive, so they can just take the bus, take the underground and walk. Like they're more prevalent versus here, like as Alexandra was saying, like we're in our car, so we're not out walking the street.
That's true. Yeah. I wonder though, now that you've been in the States for a while, and like Brian, you've been in this area for now years, when you go to a public place like a grocery store or a restaurant, do you carry that expectation that the person will smile and they'll be friendly to you? And if they're not, do you kind of judge them and think, why aren't they smiling? And why aren't they being friendly to me? Do you ever feel now that you carry that expectation with you? Like when you meet a stranger and they don't smile at you, do you think, they're not nice, or they're in a bad mood, or okay, so I do it. I do it. If someone if I go to a grocery store and the cashier doesn't smile at me, or if I go through the drive-through for Starbucks and they're not happy, I'm like, what? Do you hate your job? Or I mean, I always have this judgment, like you're supposed to smile, you're supposed to be nice.
But in fact, almost everyone should have such kind of feeling. Maybe not a strong one, so some kind of negative, maybe, but it depends what kind of behavior we got habituated, so we got used to see, and we usually see, and there can be some kind of contrast. In this contrast, we may have negative experience, negative emotions. It can be some kind of dissonance, like contradiction to what, like cognitive dissonance, since we have certain image how people should behave, we see another behavior, we perceive this the other way, and we just see contradiction and some kind of discomfort, feel discomfort as emotion, which we could interpret different ways, surely, a bit different.
Yeah. It's actually, and again, it's a culture bump. Again, it's another culture bump because I have this expectation of how the person is supposed to act. But I also often wonder about individuals who come from other locations to the Midwest, and you're learning the rules, and then people don't follow the rules, and it's this constant like, okay, what's different about this situation? Why aren't they doing it here, but they do it here? It's just amazing to me, like how much you have to process. And then what about the culture at KU Med? Like, is it the same culture at the medical center that is out on the streets of Kansas City, or is there a difference?
Not much different.
But
not much different. So at least I did not notice this. As I mean, it's not prominent if there are some differences. And I would like to notice what I saw, that actually it depends on for example, I'm a perceiver of any kind of behavior. So as we said that even though there is contradiction, for example, if there is contradiction and someone is not smiling or whatever, so it depends on my own maybe emotional attachment to this image. If I like this image, that everyone smiles and I want to see this image, I may try to find an excuse for this person. If I have more negative attitude to such image, saying that actually people just to adopt such images like cultural norm, but actually people are contradictory, much negative, and life is hard, life is not easy, then I'm not gonna find an excuse. I would say for myself that all people are just simply pretend and all people are negative. So I mean, it depends on the attitude. And if I start talking to my, for example, friend about such situations, if I have a negative attitude, I will transmit some cultural transmission. So I would transmit some negative thoughts. If I have positive feeling, I would transmit thoughts like find an excuse. So I mean, what matters is cultural transmission. What we talk to others about, not simply we think.
Yes, but also what we portray, how we interface with it matters. That's a really good point, Igor.
So I mean, that's like interaction. If someone behaves negative way, he or she may influence the perceiver. Perceiver may transmit or just to like send such information to somebody else, and so on.
Yeah. It's yes, definitely.
So
okay, well, go ahead, Igor. Go ahead. Sorry.
I mean, that's why I think it's better to support and maintain such cultural feature as smiling and trying to be nice to people, so that people feel more comfortable. I mean, otherwise it would be transmission of negative attitude. So I mean, like propagation, social.
It's I do think that the smile is trying to make other people feel comfortable. It was interesting to me, when I first learned that didn't make everybody feel comfortable, that it sometimes made people feel uncomfortable, like, well, what do they want? What do they like me? Are they crazy? Like, are they,
right?
is there some mental disorder going on? So, yeah. But thank you so much. We're at the end of our hour, Igor and Alexandra and Brian. It was so nice to have you join us. We'll be promoting this more. We just started it back up, Culture Hour. We took a little hiatus due to our workload, but we're going to be promoting this to all of our J1 community and all of our outbound students. So hopefully our group will grow a little bit. But I would like to say sometimes I enjoy the smallness because then we get a more opportunity to actually talk. And sometimes if it gets too big, it's a little harder for people to talk. So thank you, Igor. Alexandra, so good to see you both. Brian, it's so nice to meet you.
And thank you very much for this meeting.
Thank you, Alexandra.
Thank you.
Hope to see you soon.
Have a good day.
You too.